Ælfscathea Wyrd. Many civilizations, across countless stars, carry within their hearts a vision of the end. It seems that organized, self-aware life cannot help but imagine its own ruin, a final reckoning, an inevitable collapse of all things. Call it Judgment Day, the last night, or the silence. It comes in many names, yet always the same shadow. Nitwirtha has its own myth of the last and final end, the Word. In the legend, it is not heralded by war or fire, but by stillness. The sea becomes stagnant, no tide stirs its cold depths. The krakens and silver shoals do not swim. The land lies fallow, the farms barren. Frost clings to the beards of the last men as they breathe out their final mists in frozen halls. No warg howls in the forest. Its trees stand bare, skeletal, their streams stilled into ice. The last warriors sit with seek's blades frozen in their hands, while the hearth fires gutter into embers and die. Then nothing moves. A white shroud covers the mounds and the halls, burying the world in eternal winter. It is not a cataclysm of battle or divine wrath, but the slow, unstoppable hand of entropy, the second hand of the chronomaster suspended between one heartbeat and the next, forever. This is the Word, a final stop, a silence beyond death. Beornwulf wondered if the Drukhari had a word for such an ending. Perhaps they had once, long ago, for the fall of the Eldari Empire had already come and gone. Maybe the Drukhari were the last warriors of that hall, clinging to their dying fire as the creeping frost tightened its embrace. He smiled grimly. Well, he thought, here comes the frost, Ælfscathea Wyrd. High docking platform, Ælfscathea. On the high docking platform, the voidsmen of Forge World Sarathar and their Adeptus Arbites companions leapt into action. Both Blade Guard froze for a heartbeat, stunned at the sight of Kabbalite machinist Valith flung through the atmospheric shell into the void. Captain Dayananda Mandalik snapped out of it first. He knocked aside the nearest guard's blade and emptied his stub pistol into the raised visor. At this range, and without a refractor field, even the archaic weapon obliterated the warrior's head. At the same time, the Arbite's Lex Marshal hurled himself at the second blade guard, both men crashing to the deck. Boots clanged as voidsmen and troopers swarmed, clashing with shrieking Drukhari witches. The blade guard, Zeno's reflexes unbroken by the collision, shoved the Lex Marshal aside and rolled to his feet, sword flashing in hand. The Lex Marshal stamped a boot down on the blade's shaft, but the Drukhari flung a monofilament line in a lethal arc. The invisible edge hissed past, severing 3 fighters, 2 guardsmen and a witch, into collapsing halves. Rolling clear, the Lex Marshal drew a small flask from his hip and a quill from his breast pocket. Illumination rods came next, clipped into place in a practiced motion, then a stim cartridge slammed into the bolt pistol's magwell. The blade guard's strike smashed into the deck where the Arbites had been an instant before, but the counterfire was brutal. 2 bolt rounds burst through the guard's chest plate, twisting his arm backwards. The sword clattered away. The Drukhari reached for a pistol, but the 3rd bolt round punched through his helm, dropping him lifeless. All around, the prisoners struggled. Almost half lay unmoving, witches cutting down the rest despite the surprise attack. One witch raised a blood-slick poison blade over Captain Mandalik, only for a massive gauntleted hand to seize her wrist. Armor, bone, and blade shattered in the grip. Mandalik looked up into the shadow of Chapter Master Beornwulf, his Serpenta spitting fire into another witch before he swung his axe in a crushing backhand. The blow shattered the witch's sword. She laughed, defiant, and slashed into his cataphractii plate, scoring it no more than a scratch, before the return stroke of the axe split her in 2. Beornwulf's helm turned toward the upper platform. A Drukhari assault team charged the ramp. "Athelnoth," he called. From the shuttle's shadow, Hearthguard Athelnoth stepped forward, his stance locked, assault cannon roaring into life, its grinding spin drowning out the Xenos' battle cries. The charging warriors were ripped apart, their elegant armor no defense against mass reactive death. "Fig Word!" he bellowed over the thunder. On the platform's edge, Beornwulf caught sight of Katarina Malinovska locked in combat with the last witch. They wrestled over her digital weapon, its discharge firing wild into the air. Beornwulf raised his Serpenta, but the decision was made for him. Katarina wrenched an ornate knee plate from the witch's armor and slammed it upward under the warrior's chin. The body toppled through the shell after Valeth. Bjornwolf allowed himself the faintest smile. She would have made a good sister, he thought. Then his gaze swept the field. The surviving prisoners had taken up defensive positions. Farther off, the squats of Cragford Hold, whom he had aided earlier, were overrunning their own guards. Around their Chimera shuttle, its spine-mounted quad-heavy bolter poured fire into the Drukhari. In the distance, smoke began to coil from the arena's grounds. But his eyes fixed on the cruiser Shadowfang. Along its flanks, turret banks glowed, charging to fire. The sinking weight in his gut turned to iron resolve. He opened his Vox. "Now, Torhern," he ordered. In the dimly lit chambers of the control relay, Cinnabil heard the signal over his Vox, a single, sharp battle cry echoing faintly through the metallic corridors. He glanced down the far end of the passage where runesmith Torhern stood at full height, the green ghost light from the ancient lumens glinting off his armor. The runesmith nodded once. Cinnabil hefted his boarding shield into position, covering the corridor behind them, then gave the silent battle sign for proceed. Torhern braced himself against a corroded support strut and triggered the charges. One by one, in rapid succession, the relay trunks detonated, thud, 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 less than a second apart. The blasts were not dramatic, no roaring fireballs, only the abrupt shattering of the city's spinal nerve bundles, as the runesmith had called them. The order of detonation was critical. Hit the wrong relay first, and the redundant systems would come alive to compensate. Hit them in sequence, and the brain of Ælfscathea would simply die, unable to recover. The shockwaves rippled down the cathedral-length corridor as each tree-like relay shuddered and collapsed, glowing cables and rusted nodes falling like felled trunks. Dim lights flickered, sputtered, then guttered out. Cinnabil lowered his shield and looked around the now darkened hall. "That's all?" he asked, his voice a bass growl over Vox. From the shadows ahead, Torrhen's voice carried, calm and dry. "What were you expecting?" Cinnabil shrugged, the gesture exaggerated by the weight of his cataphractii plate. "Something a little more impressive." Then the gravity shifted. Cinnabil staggered, servos whining as his maglock boots slammed on automatically. The distant metal groan of the dying city rose in a chorus, and somewhere beyond the walls came the ominous boom of structural collapse. A new sound followed, a low roar rising fast. He turned, shoulder-mounted lumens stabbing into the corridor behind. The light caught a dark gleam rushing towards him. It was not metal, it was water. A wall of green-tinged coolant and runoff, freed from its shattered reservoirs, surged toward him like an ocean wave. "Fig Wyrd," he bellowed, just before the flood engulfed him. Arena prison pens. The outer gates of the detention block split open with a scream of tortured hinges, the locking bolts severed by Ranjan's manipulator arm plasma torch. Acrid smoke and the stink of burned ceramite spilled into the street. Searherd was the first through, boarding shield braced, bolt pistol barking. Bergwijn followed close, his power hammer a blur, smashing the first line of black-armored guards from their firing step. Warrant Officer Dornstall moved in with disciplined precision, his compact shotgun thumping heavy slugs into the cluster of defenders attempting to fall back to the inner yard. Behind them, the prisoners surged forward, a ragged mob in tattered fatigues, shackles still hanging from their wrists. At their head strode Commissar Ongaron, face blackened with soot, last pistol in one hand and a captured saber in the other. His voice was a constant bellow above the gunfire, driving the freed captives on with the same fervor he'd once reserved for imperial drill squares. The first clash was brutally one-sided. Surprise and the sheer momentum of the assault smashed the guards' line apart. Two were thrown over the railing into the yard below, another fell beneath Bergwijn's hammer, armor folding like paper under the blow. Ranjan's servo claws snatched a weapon from one man and snapped his neck in the same motion. "Keep moving!" Searherd roared, shield absorbing a burst of fire from the upper balcony before he pivoted and fired, his bolt pistol reducing the shooter to a mist of armor fragments and blood. The freed prisoners poured out into the street, scattering to seize cover. Dornstall kept them in loose order, shouting ranges and firing arcs over the din. Then the shadows shifted. From the far end of the street came a new sound, the high, mocking whine of splinter weaponry, answered by the whip crack of razor-edged projectiles slicing through the air. Drukhari warriors swept into view, their segmented armor glinting in the half-light. A Kabbalite squad advanced in perfect, predatory formation, their rifles sending streams of venomous fire into the panicked prisoners. Ongiran reacted instantly, his voice cutting through the sudden terror. "Cover! Cover, you bastards! Return fire!" The mob obeyed, more through sheer instinct to survive than discipline, but last fire alone did little to slow the Xenos. "Sir Hurd," Dornstall shouted over the splinter fire. "They're cutting the street off!" Sir Hurd didn't answer. He was already moving, shield high, advancing into the teeth of the Drukhari volley. Bergwijn flanked him, hammer striking the cobblestones hard enough to send splinters of stone into the air, forcing the Xenos to shift their aim. Ranjan darted along the wall, mechadendrites snapping out to drag down an unfortunate warrior from the rear of the formation. His scream was cut short as the adept drove a short-bladed cutter into the gap beneath his helm. "Push them back," Bergwijn bellowed, voice echoing from his helm. He caught a charging Kabbalite mid-leap, crushing the alien's chestplate with one hand before hurling the body into its kin. The fight devolved into a brutal knot of close-quarter combat. Splinter rifles abandoned for blades and hooks, bolt rounds cracking at point-blank range. Sirhurd's shield smashed aside a glaive, his pistol returning the favor with an explosive round to the warrior's visor. Dornstall's shotgun barked again and again, each blast felling another Drukhari at the edge of the melee. Ongiran rallied his makeshift force, pulling prisoners into flanking alleys to cut down isolated Xenos. The Commissar's saber flashed, his last pistol spitting precise shots, each one punching into the narrow seams of alien armor. Within minutes, the Kabbalite line buckled under the combined assault. Those not lying in the street in broken heaps withdrew with cold efficiency, vanishing into the smoke and shadows from which they'd come. Sirhurd took a moment to breathe, shield hanging at his side, helm lenses scanning the street. The bodies of both alien and human lay scattered, and the air was thick with the stink of poison and blood. "Get them moving," he told Ongiran, his tone leaving no room for argument, "before they send something worse." The Commissar nodded, snapping fresh orders to the survivors. Dornstall and Ranjan fell in on the flanks, Sirhurd and Bergwijn taking point. A dust-caked runner stumbled into the group, voice rasping. "Drukhari, gathering beyond the market. Dozens, maybe more." Dornstall looked at the battered prisoners around them. "We form a barricade. Buy time." Bergwijn's gauntlet came down hard on the warrant officer's back. "No, you need a distraction." His tone was final. What had once been a dropship loading bay was now a sprawling open market, the cracked ferrocrete floor still bearing the scorched outlines of landing struts. Stalls and canopies crowded the space, hung with stolen goods, alien trinkets, and the carcasses of strange beasts. The Drukhari moved in like a tide of shadows, their armor black glass against the dim light. Kabbalite squads slipped between the stalls, splinter rifles ready, a low murmur of their own tongue crackling over comms. Then, movement. From the far side of the market, a squad of Void Revenants appeared, advancing in perfect, silent formation. Bolt pistols raised, shields locked. The Drukhari reacted instantly, lines shifting, fire snapping out in bright venom-green bursts. The Revenants returned fire, their bolts tearing through alien ranks with lethal precision. The fight was fast, brutal, until one Kabbalite's blade passed through a warrior without resistance. Holograms. The real trap struck an instant later. Prisoners, led by Sirhurd, Bergwijn, Dornstall, Ranjan, and Commissar Ongiran, surged from the shadows. Last fire and shotguns barked. Astartes' warplate smashed through makeshift stalls, scattering splinters and alien bodies alike. The Drukhari, caught in the open and mid-reload, fell back under the sudden ferocity of the assault. Bergwijn's hammer cracked armor like pottery. Sirhurd's shield became an unstoppable wedge, driving their enemies into kill zones. Dornstall's squad worked with disciplined precision, herding survivors into the path of Ranjan's mechadendrites. The market floor ran slick with alien blood. Then the air shifted. From the far avenues, a new formation emerged. Armor heavier, helms crested with barbs, weapons humming with stored malice. Drukhari elites, moving with the unhurried confidence of predators, closing for the kill. Sirhurd met Bergwijn's gaze. They needed no words. Both turned to the Lexmech and the Commissar. "This is too much for you," Sir Herd said evenly. "We will deal with this," Bergwijn added. They both knew it was almost certain death. As the last of the prisoners pulled back, the two lone figures stepped into the open space of the market's center, shields locking together, braced for the charge. Bergwijn glanced at the empty streets ahead. "Holograms won't work this time." Sir Herd nodded. "True, but if we're about to take up permanent residence here, let it at least be for something memorable." Both warriors unlocked their shields in unison. "Fagward!" Bergwijn roared. "Geofon Hālgengas!" Sir Herd bellowed back. Then they charged. In the great bronze and bone tower of the command spire, Void Reaver noticed the sudden shift in tone from the controllers seated at their hololith banks. He clipped a spare munitions pack to his thigh belt, then gave a silent nod to his warriors, signaling them to move toward the doors. Only then did he turn his attention to the controllers. One by one, the hololith banks flickered, their displays shifting from calm blue to urgent magenta. Void Reaver's lip curled in irritation. "What is happening?" he roared over the sudden swell of overlapping voices. "Lord, we've lost internal comms lines. The spore is no longer transmitting," one controller called out. "Power to the security grid is down," reported another. "Navigation beacon failing," shouted a third. Another voice rose in alarm. "Gravitic drives are no longer under control." Then came the final report, sharp above the rest. "Disturbance in the arena. Prisoner breakout." A second controller added in a near shout, "Large numbers of Imperial Adeptus Astartes sighted in the market." On her command throne, witch sorceress Isereneza rose with cold grace, snapping her fingers for her staff, which an aide swiftly placed in her hand. "This is sabotage," she declared. "No," Void Reaver said, his voice low and certain. "It's an invasion." Striding to the balcony, he looked out over the city. Across the skyline, entire districts blinked erratically, lights stuttering on and off. Down at the docking port, one of the destroyers wrenched free of its moorings as its grav tethers deactivated. The drifting warship slammed into a nearby spire, shearing the structure in half before rolling out of control. Void Reaver's breath caught as he saw the 900-foot vessel tumbling towards the cruiser Shadowfang. The shipmaster clearly saw the danger. The Shadowfang, which had been training its batteries on the port, swung its guns toward the incoming hulk. Lances of blinding light and torrents of plasma spat from its arrays, raking across the unshielded destroyer. Armor plates boiled and ran like molten wax, decks tore apart as if sliced by a heated blade, and gravity shifts sent whole bulkheads tumbling free. The destroyer broke apart in midair. One colossal fragment crashed into another spire, while its mangled engines tumbled out of the atmospheric shell. Its prow, still sheathed in a battered ramming plate, grazed the Shadowfang, shoving the cruiser sideways into the path of a frigate that was desperately making for the void. The collision was cataclysmic. Sound hit like a wall of wind, knocking Void Reaver off his feet. Isersha's pale hand reached down, hauling him upright. Isereneza moved to the rows of lumen banks, all flashing magenta now. She snarled, "Secure the docks!" Void Reaver bared his teeth at his warriors. "With me!" He had taken only a step toward the great doors when, in a flash, the metal glowed white-hot and exploded inwards. Through the smoke marched Ghastward Ælfric, his eyes burning with cold blue fire. Beside him strode Wilmund, plasma pistol snapping off shots that punched through the nearest guards. Without breaking stride, he slammed his shield into the ground, locking it to block the hail of return fire. Void Reaver leveled his splinter pistol at the oncoming librarian and fired, only to watch the shot fade into nothingness as it neared Ælfric. With a single ringing strike, Ælfric slammed the ferrule of his staff onto the deck. The impact cracked through the plating, a fissure of searing blue energy racing toward Void Reaver. Isershi lunged, shoving him aside, just as the rift reached them. She swung her glaive in a warding arc, but the power slammed into her nonetheless, hurling her backwards in a burst of sparks as her armor's wards overloaded. The fissure did not slow. Two of the nearby guards were caught mid-step, their bodies turned to brittle ash statues in an instant, before it halted abruptly at the feet of witch sorceress Isereneza. With a mocking smile, she raised her staff and drank the psychic energy into its crystalline head, then flung it back as a sphere of crackling violet light. Willman ducked behind his boarding shield as the blast struck, the refraction field flaring under the assault. Ælfric did not move. Runes along his armor flared and died in showers of sparks, absorbing the impact. He laughed. He was in his element now, doing what he had been trained for his entire life. These Xenos had brought him low before. Now they would reap his fury. He would tear them apart, then hunt down Beornwolf and burn him to cinders. The chapter needed true leadership. His leadership. Yes, whispered a voice in his mind, the tones eerily familiar. It mimicked Mentor Psychona Mentis, its words chiming like glass tumbling down a frozen gorge. Yes, kill them. Kill them all. Bring the end to the heretics. Ælfric caught a charging Drukhari warrior one-handed by the throat. His eyes burned with pale witchfire, and the Kabbalite screamed, until the scream warped into manic laughter as its flesh writhed and split apart. A daemon of Slaanesh burst forth, shimmering and perfect in its horror, landing lightly before leaping upon another guard. The daemonette's bronze blade sliced him open in a single flourish, her other claw skewering a third who barely had time to cry out. Willman stared in horror, his mind battling to reject the reality before him. Another wave of energy struck Ælfric. His armor buckled, scorched, and split at the seams, yet he only laughed louder. From opposite sides of the chamber, Void Reaver and Azirshi took cover behind smoking consoles, each exchanging a glance of recognition. In the center, Ælfric and Ælfscathea hurled psychic power back and forth in crackling surges, neither able to overpower the other. And with every exchange, more warriors split apart, sloughing off flesh and armor, to reveal fresh, howling demons within. "My place is here!" Ghastward Ælfric roared. His voice carried a psychic concussion that split two more warriors apart in sprays of burning ash. The blast staggered Ælfscathea back a step, her staff trembling in her grip. Ælfric strode forward through the storm of weapons fire, each bolt and blade seeming to glance harmlessly away. "You feeble things! Did you think you could escape the mother of bliss and ecstasy?" he bellowed. It was Ælfric's voice, but twisted, spoken in the cadence of Old Werthen, the ancient tongue of both Nitwertha and Cenarion. His laughter rang out in the chamber, yet it was no longer his own. It belonged to the Neverborn. Willman caught movement. Void Reaver breaking from cover, a long black blade in his grip, its edge writhing like liquid. He lunged at the librarian, swinging in a lethal arc. Ælfric's staff spat a blast of witchfire, but the blade drank the energy whole. The Drukhari swung again, only for a plasma bolt from Willman to hammer into his side, twisting his aim. Void Reaver slammed into the wall, shattering a console before crumpling to the deck. Ælfric's laughter deepened, shifting in pitch until a woman's voice spoke through him. "You will all burn for the Iron Father and for the God of Pleasure." Around them, the air rippled with raw warp energy. Daemons winked into existence where fear pooled thickest, sinuous forms feeding on the screams of the city beyond. Ælfric could feel it all, could taste it. Power swelled in him, more intoxicating than anything he had ever known, and he wanted more. Willman moved to his flank, shield raised. "Lord, what ails you?" he called. Ælfric turned, eyes now glowing crimson. "Whelp," he hissed. A spear of witchfire punched from his staff, smashing against Willman's shield. The blast hurled the Hearthguard back through the stone doorframe, the impact cracking his cataphractii plate. Seeing the distraction, Ælfscathea struck, her blade singing as it cleaved through Ælfric's arm. The librarian staggered but responded with a brutal kick, hurling her back and spitting a Slaaneshi curse. Daemons surged over her, their claws dragging her down. Ælfric stared at his severed hand. For a heartbeat, clarity pierced the madness. His augmetic, given to him the day he was made an Iron Hand, lay on the floor. What was he doing? Then pain ripped through his stump. Flesh split as something pushed outward, a new clawed hand, shredding the old augmetics. He flexed it in revulsion, cursing the weakness of flesh, until the skin burned away, revealing a hand of pure, living metal gleaming like quicksilver. Just like the Iron Father's. The voice of Mentis whispered inside him, "Your place is here." Yes, Ælfric breathed. His place was here. He drew his seeks, a crude barbarian's weapon, and let it fall to the deck with a dull clang. Witch sorceress impaled the last of the daemonettes before her, the creature's scream fading into oily smoke. She glanced toward her sister, still locked in battle with a towering four-legged demon beast, and saw she was winning ground. But the real danger stood before her. The librarian was ringed by a burning wall of pink warp flame, silver hand held high, laughter pouring from his mouth in two voices at once, one an Astartes, the other a demon witch. Ælfscathea leveled her power staff and charged, moving faster than sight. Every shred of her will poured into the killing thrust. She tore through the barrier, her flesh blistering in the warp fire's heat, only for Ælfric to match her speed. Knocking the staff aside and seizing her by the throat, she met his gaze and saw not the librarian's eyes, but the cold, predatory stare of Cenarion. In the voice of the Neverborn, Ælfric whispered, "Hello, Ælfscathea. I met your mother once. She liked to play with her food too." His face twisted, the daemon's features melting into Ælfric's own as he roared, "Kill the witch!" Then, just as suddenly, his expression smoothed, his voice calm and mocking. "Oh, you need to learn patience." He winked at her. "I'm not talking to you." Her lungs burned as he tightened his grip. One half of his face was scorched away, revealing a gleaming mask of silver metal twisted in rage. The other side smiled placidly. She realized with horror that the man and daemon did not merely share a body, they fought for it. The sheer power radiating from him seared her like invisible fire. She tore free a poisoned blade and drove it into the plates of his armor. The silver half screamed in fury, the flesh half laughed. Ælfric gritted his teeth, voice his own for a moment. "Give me back my body, daemon," the other voice chuckled. "Whatever made you think it was still yours, little man?" The silver side screamed again. Wilman stirred on the floor, his armor felt impossibly heavy, servos grinding under the strain. Every movement sent knives of pain through broken bones. His shield was a molten ruin. He could not comprehend what his captain had become. Daemon-bearer, warp-binder, traitor? He aimed his plasma pistol at Ælfscathea, but hesitated. Then his eyes locked with Void Reavers. For a heartbeat, two sworn enemies regarded one another, oath-bound to destroy each other, but recognizing that this, at least, was a foe they shared. Wilman nodded. Void Reaver braced. The Hearthguard lurched forward, firing into Ælfric's back. The plasma blast overloaded his power pack, shrouding him in a burst of molten light. Ælfscathea collapsed, gasping. Ælfric turned, screaming, not in one voice but in both. The psychic shockwave ripped through Wilman's cataphractii plate, severing his arm and flinging him to the ground. Void Reaver leapt, the black liquid-edged blade absorbing Ælfric's psychic barrage before slamming into his armor. The librarian's staff shattered into burning fragments. Daemonettes swarmed to defend him, but the black blade cut through them like fire through spider silk, each touch burning their immaterial flesh. The distraction cost Void Reaver dearly. Ælfric's psychic blow hurled him across the chamber. Ælfscathea lunged, burying a poison dagger in Ælfric's back. He flung her aside and, as Ælfscathea moved to strike again, rammed his blade into her chest. Her scream was agony and defeat. He laughed, twin voices in unison. "My place is here. Here I will rule." Through cracked lenses and shattered armor, Wilman stood, one arm gone, power hammer in his remaining hand. "Sorry, Lord," he said, voice breaking. He charged. Ælfric raised his silver hand. The hammer froze mid-swing. "So," he sneered, "the heretic shows his true colors. Nitwirtha will burn for that." Wilman strained, the hammer flaring with blue light, but it was like trying to move a mountain. Then Ælfscathea, with her last breath, channeled every scrap of power into her staff, a lance of psychic fire spearing into Ælfric's chest. He roared in pain. Ælfscathea rose, her own power slamming through his armor. The scream became a discordant duet of daemon and man. The hammer moved. Ælfric's silver hand shot up to deflect the hammer, then froze. What was he doing? He was fighting his own Hearthguard, a man sworn to protect him. Around him, through the haze of battle and the shriek of daemons, he could feel them, his brothers. Not iron warriors, Void Revenants, his brothers. "What have I done?" Mentis's voice came to him, not warped by the daemon, but as it had been in life. "Your place is there." He saw the truth, saw how far he had fallen. The warp light guttered in his grasp as he let the power fade. The hammer began to descend. "What are you doing?" hissed the daemon in Mentis's voice. "Ending you," Ælfric thought. A note of genuine shock bled into the voice. "You will kill yourself too?" The flesh side of Ælfric's face smiled. "That's why. Mentis told me, my place is here." To kill you, Damon. Cenarion's scream tore through his mind as the hammer struck. Void Reaver, seizing Wilman's fallen pistol, a relic forged for a chapter master, overloaded the weapon and fired. Cenarion tried to ward the blast, but her attention slipped. Psychic spear in his chest, dagger in his back, hammer descending. She lashed out at Wilmund with a last psychic scream, even as the hammer struck home. Ælfric's skull caved in. Warp energy ripped free in a blinding detonation. Void Reaver and Ælfscathea were hurled away. Azareneza's body vaporized as the power she contained exploded inward. Ælfric's form, bearing the strength of a chief librarian, a greater daemon, and a dying sorceress, collapsed into a single ball of incandescent light. It engulfed Wilmund where he stood. In an instant, the Hearthguard was erased, reduced to nothing but drifting motes in the boiling air. Warpfire still hissed in the corners, gnawing at the bronze and bone walls. Splintered consoles spat sparks into the haze. The air was a choking stew of scorched oil, ionized metal, and the cloying sweetness of dissipating demonic essence. The few remaining guards crept from cover, reloading their weapons with trembling hands. Void Reaver pushed himself upright. His helm lenses flickered, rebooting after the overload. He took in the wreckage around him, noting his black blade lying across the boiling remains of an evaporating daemon, the ink-dark surface rippling at the edges, as if feeding on the flesh. He had always found that unnatural. His body felt as if it had been crushed in a grav clamp. Armor plates hung in jagged ruin, his right vambrace completely slagged. A sound broke through the ringing in his ears, labored breathing. Ælfscathea was slumped against a collapsed pillar, one hand pressed to her side where her own kin's poison still burned. She dragged herself upright, her face pale, eyes fixed on the scorched circle at the center of the chamber. Nothing remained there but fused metal, still faintly glowing. Void Reaver looked down at the relic pistol still clutched in his hand. Warped and scorched from the overcharge, it nevertheless bore the maker's sigils. Wilman's weapon. The librarian was gone. So was the Astartes in relic Terminator armor. No body, no armor, not even ash. Ælfscathea limped to his side, blood streaking her armor. Her voice was hoarse. Nothing, not even a trace. Neither my sister, nor the half-demon. Void Reaver's jaw tightened. He had no words. In a few months, he had lost witch sorceress Ylith, and now 2 of her daughters. He placed a hand on Ælfscathea's dented cuirass, then moved toward the balcony. Outside, the din of battle rolled on. Most of the city lay in darkness, broken only by the glow of fires from overloaded plasma mains. A second destroyer was breaking from its moorings, fleeing the docks, while his own vessel still lay snarled in the wreckage of a collapsed tower. Battle cries and death shouts rose in a dozen tongues from the streets below. Ælfscathea reached his side, gazing down at the chaos. "We can still regain control," she said. Void Reaver shook his head. "It no longer matters. If the Revenants know our location, it's finished. Ælfscathea's power was its anonymity. Now it has neither." He raised his personal vox, patching into the city's broadcast towers. At least the public address system still carried power. "Attention, all citizens of Ælfscathea," his voice boomed across the district. "Abandon the city, evacuate immediately." He dropped the comlink onto the deck. "Back to honest piracy, my dear," he muttered, turning away. Ælfscathea lingered, staring at the city one last time. Without another word, they turned from the scorched circle and walked toward the shattered gates, the black blade resting across Void Reaver's shoulder, Wilmund's ruined pistol hanging from his belt like a silent epitaph. Wilmund opened his eyes. There was no helm upon his head, no weight of armor pressing on his shoulders. His hair clung damp to his scalp, salt water dripping down his brow. He was lying in the surf of the Geofon sea. Cool waves lapped against him, each retreat pulling soft sand from beneath his fingers. The air was thick with the familiar tang of brine and the clean bite of Nitwortha's wind. He sat up slowly, drinking in the scene. To one side, the gray expanse of sea stretched forever. To the other, a mist-wreathed shore rose toward rolling land. Above, through that curtain of fog, a great hall stood, its roof beams lost in shadow, yet from within spilled a golden light, warm and pure. Somewhere deep in its heart, faint voices sang a song he half remembered from his youth. He felt no pain, no weight of duty. His oath was fulfilled. Wilmund stood, the water breaking against his shins. and for the first time in years allowed himself the thought, I am home. The mist thickened as he moved, shapes shifting within it, figures perhaps, keeping their distance, or only shadows of memory. They did not threaten, merely watched. Then from the sea, a sound. It began low, like the grinding of icebergs far off in the current, but it grew, resolving into the harsh cries of battle, voices shouting in a dozen tongues, the dull thud of impact, the staccato thunder of bolt fire. He turned toward the sound. Before him now, waist-deep in the Geofon, rose a sheer wall of ice. The water broke at its base in restless waves, and beyond it, movement, shapes. Warriors locked in combat, blurred as if seen through smoke. He knew that was no longer his place. His war was over. The hall waited for him. The winding path climbed from the beach into the mist, straight toward that golden light. He took a step toward it, and then he heard it. A voice carried over the sea and ice, raw with defiance. Geofon Hālgengas, the old battle cry of the Void Revenants. He looked down. A hammer lay at his feet, half buried in the wet sand, the surf foaming over its head. Its weight was familiar. He bent, taking it in his hand, and as he rose the world shifted. He was no longer bareheaded and unarmored. Plate closed about him, forged in the style of the great forge, burnished and whole, every link and plate remade, not the battered broken suit he had worn to his death. At his hip hung a bolter, its casing engraved with the marks of his company and the oaths he had sworn. The cry came again, echoing against the ice wall. An oath was an oath. Wilmund reached to his belt, drew the bolter, and with hammer in one hand and gun in the other, walked with purpose into the shallows toward the wall of ice. Ghostlight shimmered about him as the mist and sea began to bleed away, replaced by the fire and steel of battle. In the marketplace, Bergwijn and Sirherd thundered forward, their shields smashing aside the first ranks of Drukhari. Splinter fire hissed past, venom shards ricocheting off their plates. Then, from the side, something moved, fast, silent, a tall figure in the shimmer of ghost light. At first, they dismissed it as another decoy, one of their own holograms cast to confuse the fight by one of Brother Osric's automated runes. The figure strode straight toward them, wrapped in a pale gleam like moonlight through smoke. Power armor, gaslioma glow with its own illumination, a heavy hammer in one gauntleted hand, a bolt gun in the other. The Drukhari ignored it, laughing as they poured fire through the image, until one warrior screamed, cut in half by the hammer's swing. The two Void Revenants slowed. The ghostlight figure was moving through the Xenos like a storm, bolt rounds bursting from its gun barrel, each shot crushing armor and bone. The hammer rose and fell in perfect, brutal arcs. Bergwijn's voice was low, almost hesitant. Sird? Does that look like Wilmund? Sirherd finished, in Gastelm armor, but it's him. They closed with the Revenant, and for a moment the three fought as one, shields, hammer, and ghostlight weapon cutting the Drukhari line to pieces. The enemy's fire passed harmlessly through the apparition, but their warriors fell as if struck by a living man. Sirherd saw the gleam of the spectral hammer's head. It was no trick of the light. This was a real Revenant, a shade drawn from the halls of their chapter's dead, their first. Wilmund must have fallen, Bergwijn panted, swinging his own hammer in a vicious downswing. The Drukhari broke. Those nearest the shade screamed in their own tongue, voices shrill. Keine Saluth! Keine Saluth! A name spat in terror. The last warriors fled into the shadows, their formation shattered. The market lay silent, save for the hiss of burning stalls. Then came the sound of boots, Commissar Anguran and the freed prisoners pouring into the square, weapons ready. Sirherd and Bergwijn turned to find their ghostly comrade, but the gaslioma light had already faded. Where Wilmund's spectre had stood, there was nothing but the churned dust of the market floor, cooling brass casings, and the fading echo of bolt gun fire. Sirherd's helm lenses flickered in the heat haze, picking out shapes in the smoke beyond the market's edge. The low growl of engines rolled closer, heavy grav drives and the shrill whine of jet bike turbines weaving between the buildings. Beneath it came the rhythmic pounding of boots, a steady drumbeat against the fractured streets. This was only the start. The city around them was alive with chaos, sporadic bursts of gunfire, the hollow thump of grenades, and the ceaseless chorus of screams, both human and alien. He turned, surveying the freed prisoners they had fought so hard to reach. Barely 2/3 still stood, many of those leaning on makeshift weapons or wounded comrades. Faces were hollow with exhaustion and shock, but all eyes were on him. Sir Herd lifted his vox bead to his mouth. Raven protocol. The words carried more weight than a shout. Men stiffened. Bergwine's gaze met his, and after a heartbeat's silence, the older warrior nodded once. Around them, the troops moved with grim purpose, hands reaching for void gear stored in battered packs and captured crates. Seals were checked, helm locks twisted home, and the quiet hiss of pressurizing suits filled the air. Inside the derelict freighter, the corridor groaned under the strain of the ship's wounded hull, bulkhead plating flexing with each minute shift of pressure. Beyond the ruptured section, the black void pressed close, glittering with shards of drifting debris. Ordmare stood with his back to the airlock frame, one boot braced against a strut, the other planted on the deck. His Serpenta rested steady in his hands, muzzle trained down the narrow passage toward the bridge. The faint rasp of his respirator filled the dead air. Opposite him, crouched low behind a coil of conduit, Hālgengas scanned the shadows with the easy poise of a hunter. Her long pattern rifle lay across her knees, eyes flicking between the passage ahead and the sensor bead at her ear. "Charges are set," came a voice over the squad channel from one of the armsmen. "Making our way out." "Copy," Ordmare replied flatly. To the scout he added, "No sign of that hunting party. Might get out before they return." Hālgengas sighed. If only the galaxy was so kind. As if in answer, the faintest hints reached them. Ghost lights invisible to the human eye, but bright in the ultraviolet filter of Hālgengas' gun sight. Drukhari looms, moving closer. She grimaced. "Taunt the galaxy, and she answers," she murmured. Ordmare adjusted his aim in the darkness. "The Emperor will protect us," he said. The Drukhari came in a long, sinuous line, sleek armor black and glistening in the reflected starlight from the open hull. At their head strode a captain in flaring plates and a barbed helm crest, splinter pistol angled low, blade resting across his shoulder. Hālgengas waited, sights fixed on the lead warriors as they neared the detonator line. The captain slowed, raising a hand. The tip of his blade moved to the bulkhead, tracing along the housing of one of the explosives. "Throne," Hālgengas whispered. At that moment, the vox in their ears crackled. Raven protocol. Out of time. From behind Ordmare and Hālgengas, the rest of their landing party emerged into the corridor. The Drukhari spotted them instantly, diving for cover and opening fire. Splinter rounds and las beams crossed in a vicious crossfire. The Xenos were not advancing. They had seen the trap. This would come down to raw firepower, and the enemy had the advantage. Hālgengas shifted her aim to the nearest demolition charge fixed to the wall like a limpet mine. She fired. A blast of white fire ripped through the confined space, the corridor folding inward as ceiling and deck plate charges went off in sequence. Armor shards, splinter rifles, and bodies were hurled in all directions. The shockwave tore one side of the bulkhead open to the void. Hālgengas hurled a blind grenade into the splintered ruin. Drukhari fire sputtered out of the metallic cloud, but it was wild and unaimed. She moved to the hatch, the opening now twice its original size after the blast, and waved the armsmen through. They scrambled out onto the outer hull. Ordmare stumbled, his vox line snagging on jagged metal. Hālgengas drew her seeks and cut it free, shoving him on. From the smoke behind them, the Drukhari captain emerged. Hālgengas saw him first. With her blade still in hand, she slashed, cutting a deep tear in his void suit. The sudden decompression flung him backwards through the hatch, tumbling into the black. Gathered on the hull, the voidsmen glanced back along the cable they had used to reach the freighter. "We'll never make it back," Ordmare said, voice edged with panic. "They'll cut us down in the open." Hālgengas looked up and saw a Drukhari destroyer gliding out of the Space Hulk's docking bay with predatory grace. Then lances of brilliant light punched through the darkness, stabbing into the Xeno's ship. Its void shields, still down, could not save it. The beams sliced the hull into drifting sections. For an instant, she saw crew spilling into the void before macro rounds hammered the wreck apart. The light vanished as something vast passed overhead, the strike cruiser Eotensip sailing by. Hālgengas grinned inside her helm. "We don't have to walk. Our ride came to us. Void jumped now. As one, the armsman leapt, pushing off the freighter's hull and falling toward the Ælfscathea. The distance was barely 500 yards, but half the cruiser had already passed before they struck its surface, grasping at the tethers laid out for just such an emergency. Ordmare hit awkwardly, his suit tore at the elbow, sealant foam spraying into the void. Hālgengas grabbed him, hauling him in before he could rebound away from the hull. On the freighter, Drukhari survivors emerged, taking firing positions along the shattered edge. Splinter rounds spanged against the Ælfscathea's armor. Hālgengas lifted her rifle, only to be hit by a splinter round. Her helm cracked, the weapon spinning away into the void as she lost her grip. This time, Ordmare seized her, pain shooting through his broken arm as she used it to pull herself back onto the hull. More rounds sparked off the warship's side. "I've had enough of this," Ordmare panted. He pulled an emitter from his belt, looked back at the freighter. "Emperor protects," he said, and thumbed the trigger. The freighter's aft section detonated in a blossom of fire, jagged plates tumbling into the holographic shell of the space hulk. The forward end, shorn loose, tumbled downward into the gravity well of the gas giant. Drukhari, not flung with it, were left spinning in open void. The explosion rippled through the hulk's superstructure. A vast power conduit erupted in plasma fire and lightning arcs. The great hollow field shimmered once, then failed, revealing the hidden city of Ælfscathea within the hulk's immense hull. Inside, they saw a colossal warship, the Shadowfang, half embedded in a ruined internal spire. Along the hull of the Ælfscathea, macro cannon roared, sending fresh fire into the remaining Drukhari vessels. Beornwulf braced. Beside him, Ethelnoth swept his assault cannon across a line of Drukhari moving to flank their position. They were in the lower market, a choking maze of narrow passages, fighting their way toward the control tower. Beornwulf had seen Voidreaver heading that way earlier, and he fully intended to find him. But the city teemed with enemy warriors. Not just the raiders of Ælfscathea, but fighters from half a dozen other covens, and every street seemed to birth more. A Drukhari fell under a crackling blast from Beornwulf's Sildithnadel. He reloaded in one smooth motion, pulling the last drum of ammunition from his belt and locking it into Ethelnoth's weapon. He slapped the Hearthguard's armored flank. "Last drum. Make it count." "We'll be using blades soon," Captain Mandalik shouted from cover. He and his men were pressed into the hoarding of a fabric stall, the hanging cloth smoking from repeated impacts. Beornwulf glanced back. Barely half the Lexmech who had come with them from the landing platform still lived. Katarina was dragging the Arbite's Lex Marshal into cover, then rose over his body and fired her digital weapon, bringing down a skimmer with a hiss of ruptured grav plates. She met Beornwulf's eyes and shook her head. The Marshal was dead. A Drukhari with twin blades charged. Beornwulf swung his axe in a broad arc, cleaving the warrior in two. More came. They weren't going to break through, not at this rate. He was on the point of giving the order when Sirhurd's voice cut over the vox. "Raven Protocol," Beornwulf grinned. That was a decision he wouldn't have to make himself. Raven Protocol, first devised by Chaplain Wulfgar, was a last-ditch order. Drop everything and fight. In this case, it meant something more. Far off, the hollow field that had shrouded the void flickered and vanished. Beyond the illusionary wall, he saw the freighter burning, tiny at this distance like a toy, its hull splitting in the black. "Void suits now," he called. Katarina's voice cut in sharp and urgent. "Hang on to something." She sealed her own breather. A heartbeat later, the atmospheric shell collapsed. The atmospheric shell buckled with a soundless ripple, and reality roared in. There was no gradual wind, no warning gust, just an instant, explosive howl as every molecule of air sought to flee into the yawning black. The market became a maelstrom. The smoke from burning stalls tore sideways in a gray sheet. Fabric canopies ripped from their frames, whipping through the air like flensing knives. Debris, coins, blades, entire carts snapped away, tumbling into the void. Screams were swallowed in the vacuum. Civilians too slow to find anchor points were yanked from the streets, bodies pinwheeling through the air, their hands clawing for anything fixed. Those with void suits slammed the seals shut, helmets locking with a hiss. Those without felt the breath torn from their lungs before they could cry out. Drukhari and humans alike were flung together in the storm. The Xenos with grav hooks dug into the decking held fast, their plaited hair streaming like banners. Others spun away, clutching weapons, armor plates cracking as they bounced from struts or spires before vanishing into the gulf. The sound in Bjornwolf's helmet was a hollow thunder of his own heartbeat, the shriek of torn atmosphere muted by the suit's filters. Around him, Lexmech and Arbites slammed their mag boots down, bracing against the deck. Ethelnoth's assault cannon whined as he swept it in great arcs, bolt shells detonating in the middle of the drifting melee, bodies erupting into clouds of frost and crimson crystals. Captain Mandalik's men locked arms in a chain, pulling two gasping civilians into cover before the void seized them. Katerina vaulted over the Arbit's Lex-Marshal's corpse, her cloak whipping in the gale, snapping out a grapnel to snag a fleeing servitor before it was lost. Overhead, the vast gas giant swelled in the newly visible sky, a massive, roiling wall of ochre and cream that blotted out the stars. It filled half the horizon, turning the light cold and alien. Fires guttered out in the streets as their oxygen vanished, replaced by a faint halo of ice crystals where they'd been. Far off, the burning freighter tumbled past the ruptured shell, its aft section vomiting fire and shards into the void. The Eotinsip's hull loomed beyond, bristling with weapon batteries that hurled incandescent shells toward a Drukhari cruiser, the macro fire making the vacuum itself seem to shudder. And beneath it all, the city kept dying, its alleys and plazas becoming rivers of drifting detritus, its people reduced to pale specks scattered into eternity. The Shadowfang tore itself free of the spire, stonecrete and plasteel sheared like paper, raining fire and rubble through the void hangar. For a heartbeat it hung there, keeling under the strain of its own wounded hull. Then its thrusters flared in a guttering roar and it surged forward. Its lower flank scraped across the hangar deck, sending molten lines of steel screaming in its wake. The squat crewed shuttle, still chained to the platform, opened up with its twin heavy bolters. Shells sparked and ricocheted harmlessly from the Xenos warship's blackened prow. The Shadowfang ignored the fire entirely, banking toward the hangar mouth. On the bridge of the Eotensip, Shipmaster Waldheer was already moving. "Bring us about." Too late. Spears of violet fire lanced from the Shadowfang's batteries, ripping through the void between them. The Eotensip shuddered as her aft drives were gutted, the blast tearing away everything back to the baffle plate. Consoles screamed alarms. Crew were flung from their stations. "She's still moving," Waldheer said flatly. "Bring guns to bear." The Eotensip swung sluggishly on auxiliary thrusters, port batteries yawning open, just in time to take a full broadside from the Shadowfang. Macro mounts detonated in blooms of molten iron. Girders folded. A line of fire chased down the ship's spine. On the bridge, Waldheer barely blinked. He was looking at the Shadowfang now, studying its angle, its drift. He smiled. Fire thrusters. The command wasn't to his own crippled drives. Out beyond, the ragged hull of the Space Hulk shuddered and moved. Rocket pods, jury-rigged torpedo engines, and rusted booster packs welded to its flanks roared into life, each ignition a sunburst in the dark. Slowly, impossibly, the mass of the Hulk began to drift forward. The Shadowfang's crew realized too late. The vast derelict slid into its path like the closing hand of a god, its bulk eclipsing the stars. The Shadowfang was caught between the Hulk and the lunging Eotensip. The Revenant strike cruiser rammed her straight in the prow. Metal screamed like a dying Leviathan as the Xenos flagship buckled, split, and was crushed flat against the Hulk's mass. For a moment, it hung there, broken, shuddering, and then it came apart in a silent bloom of shattered wraithbone and boiling plasma. The wreck tumbled end over end, falling away into the roiling storms of the gas giant below. The Eotensip rode clear, her forward sections eerily untouched. Waldheer had already vented every compartment ahead of the collision, flooding the bulkheads with sealant foam. Not a man had been lost in the impact. The Drukhari flagship was gone, but the Eotensip was adrift, her drives torn away, her power bleeding into the void, a hunter victorious, yet dead in the water. Central market of dying Ælfscathea. A handful of Drukhari staggered upright, breathers hissing as they locked them in place. Around them, their kin twitched in the last spasms of suffocation, air fleeing in thin, glittering vapor. Overhead a raider, its crew hanging limp in the rigging, slewed wildly before plowing into a high wall, vanishing in a spray of shattered wraithbone and dust. The survivors brought up their weapons, too late. Bergwijn burst from the mist, hammer raised high. The blow crumpled the helm of one warrior and hurled another into the skeletal frame of a market stall, extinguished fire hissing as the last oxygen fled. A splinter rifle came up in trembling hands, but Sirherd was already behind the Xenos. His Sikhs punched through the gorget, armor and suit split with a hiss, and the Drukhari withered like a salted worm. Bergwijn glanced at his brother's empty fists. "Where's your hammer?" Sirherd gave a casual shrug. "Stuck in a homunculus." He pointed down a rubble-choked street, ran off that way. "And the Queen's chainsword?" Before Sirherd could answer, Commissar Ongren stormed past, a relic chainsword gripped in both hands, vox bellowing over the hiss of leaking air. "Kill them all. Remember the arena. If I see pity in any man's eyes, I'll cut him down myself. Ukai! Ukai!" A ragged band of Imperial officers and adepts followed in his wake, clutching scavenged blades and battered lasguns, void suits patched with tape and sealant. Bergwijn watched them vanish into the vapor. "He's cheered up since we met him." Sirherd nodded, helm lenses glinting. "Seems to be fitting in just fine." A hover skiff rattled up the debris-strewn path, Lexmech adept Ranjan at the tiller. Warrant Officer Dornstall crouched behind the twin heavy stubber, giving a wave before a splinter round slammed into his chest plate, toppling him backwards. Bergwijn and Sirherd broke into a run, but a cybermastiff leaped from the smoke first, jaws clamping onto the Drukhari sniper. Wraithbone armor cracked, oxygen vented in a silent scream, and the body tumbled away. The two Astartes reached Dornstall, who was sitting up with a grunt. Ranjan had already clambered into the gun mount, sending heavy stubber fire hammering into shapes beyond sight. "I thought you were done for," Sirherd remarked, hauling him upright. Dornstall pulled a dented metal flask from under his jacket, a splinter shard buried deep in its side. "They don't call these life preservers for nothing." From a side street emerged Captain Mandalik, Katerina at his side, a handful of troopers straggling behind. The soldiers saluted the Void Revenants. "Docking bays are clear," Mandalik reported. "The squats seem to have it in hand, but the Lex Marshal is dead." Dornstall returned the salute. "Find the Commissar. He went that way. Then form squads and sweep the city. There'll be more out there." Sirherd took a pistol from Dornstall, raising an eyebrow. "You planning to take the city?" Dornstall's visor misted as he grinned, nodding toward the burning hulk of the Shadowfang and the crippled Eotensip. "I think Ælfscathea just became our lifeboat." Sirherd looked around. "Where's Bjornwolf?" Bergwijn checked his vox, shook his head. "Range is shot, too much iron and vapor in the air." Katerina stepped forward. "He was heading for the control tower." They all turned. The tower leaned at a drunken angle, venting gas in great roiling clouds. Sirherd slammed a fresh magazine into his pistol. "We're Hearthguard. If the chapter master is in danger, we go to him." Bergwijn fell in behind. "You know he hates it when we follow him." Sirherd chuckled darkly. "He told me to come later. Maybe he'll need a bullet stop." They vanished into the mist together, towering shapes moving like wraiths, two specters on their way to war. Lateral torpedo room, number 3. Azirshi flicked the sequence of crystal toggles across the cockpit console, her fingertips trailing briefly over the runes as the Drukhari shuttle's systems came alive. The control glyphs shimmered faintly in her sight, a ghostly overlay from her psychic senses confirming the machine spirit's grudging compliance. Satisfied the craft was operational, she rose from the seat, letting a Kabbalite pilot slip into place without a word. This was no ordinary skiff. A Revenger-class stealth shuttle, its dome hull and narrow profile designed for silent infiltration. It was one of the Kabbalite machinist's pet creations, originally conceived by her gene mother Elith, but reworked after her death to vanish from auger locks entirely. The recent wars had forced Ælfscathea's artisans to adapt. Even elegance bent before survival. The torpedo room had been repurposed as a hidden launch bay, allowing these shuttles to slip in and out without ever passing the watchful eyes of the port docks. She stepped down from the cockpit gantry. The few remaining guards stood sentinel by the blast shutters, their splinter rifles held at a wary rest. Ælfscathea motioned for the survivors of the control room debacle to board. Void Reaver stood at the viewport, helm beneath one arm, his gaze fixed on the drifting embers of the ruined city beyond. "It's all gone," he said at last, voice low and flat. "Nothing left but ash and corpses." Ælfscathea approached. Of all Ælf's cloned daughters, she had been the youngest and least directed. They had allowed her to grow wild, choosing the path of the witch over that of the sorceress, though the warp sang in her veins. Ælfscathea had been more way station than home, a place to anchor her between raids and long, bloody ventures in the void. She understood his grief, but his gaze was fixed far beyond loss. "You can rebuild," she said softly. "Time is not infinite to us, but it is long enough." Void Reaver's lip curled. "I don't want to rebuild. I want vengeance." Ælfscathea felt the psychic pressure shift, a ripple in the immaterium, the faint electric taste of destiny approaching. She smiled faintly. "Then you may have it sooner than you think." The blast doors at the far end of the torpedo room blew inward. Ælfscathea strode through, bellowing, "Fegward!" His assault cannon roared, the storm of rounds ripping through the nearest guards before they could raise a defense. Ælfscathea's warp shield bloomed around herself and the merchant prince, ghostlight deflecting some bolts, while others vanished entirely into the ether. When the drum ran dry, the barrels spun empty. Ælfscathea let the heavy weapon fall to the deck with a thud, drawing a bolt pistol and a black-forged blade edged in faint blue light. Beornwulf entered beside him, axe in one gauntleted hand, disruptor pistol in the other. Ælfscathea stepped forward to shield her prince, but Void Reaver gently moved her aside. He looked past her to the butchered remains of his last bodyguard, slain before they could strike. His shoulders straightened. "I will give you a chance to run," he said in precise, unaccented Gothic. "You have raised a kingdom, brought down a Drukhari house. Let that be enough for one day's murder." Beornwulf tilted his helm slightly, replying in flawless Drukhari Eltherin, "On a day of murder, the moon has not yet risen." Void Reaver's face twitched, half a smile, half a sneer. "Lady Ælfscathea, do better next time." Her smirk faltered. She inclined her head and darted for the shuttle's hatch. Ælfscathea shifted to fire, but Beornwulf's voice cut across the moment. "The skiff carries Prometheum launch tanks. You'd take out the deck." Reluctantly, Ælfscathea lowered his aim. The shuttle dropped into the launch tube. Rocket packs ignited with a dull thunder, the craft shrouding itself as its chameleoline skin came online. Void Reaver drew a long breath. The black blade in his hand rippled like oil under starlight, the deck hissing where it touched. "Until the blade's last kiss, Astartes," he said in Gothic. Beornwulf dipped his helm in acknowledgement. "Shalith, Kindraz." Void Reaver blurred into motion. The Sildathnidal flared, its psychic blast striking the black sword and dying against it. Beornwulf's axe swept in, but Void Reaver slid aside, bringing his blade down on Ælfscathea's pauldron, splintering ceramite and shearing into the pistons of his leg. The Hearthguard crashed down, stunned. Beornwulf shoved him clear, taking the return swing on the haft of his axe. The edge sparked, biting into one blade head. Beornwulf twisted the weapon, revealing the undamaged side, and stepped back. Void Reaver shifted his grip, the long reach of his sword poised. His armor bore a single bolter crater over the ribs. The faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. Beornwulf's breath rasped through the vox grill, each inhale hot against the cold. Void Reaver stood opposite him, blade angled low, the black rippling length of it distorting the air like a heat shimmer. They circled. Void Reaver struck again, a low thrust aimed at the joint of Beornwulf's greave. The Astartes pivoted, axe sweeping down in a cleaving counter. Sparks erupted as Void Steel edge met the impossible density of the Drukhari's blade, the clash vibrating up his arms. Beornwulf used the momentum, twisting his torso to drive the disruptor pistol into Void Reaver's flank. The shot went off with a crackling hiss, blocked. The Kabbalite prince's blade had blurred in a reflexive parry, dispersing the energy into oily light. Then Void Reaver was in his guard, the black sword whipping up in a vertical arc. Beornwulf caught it on the haft of his axe, the impact ringing in his bones. The force drove him half a step back, boots skidding on the slick deck. A sudden spin, Void Reaver reversed his grip and came in from the side. Beornwulf ducked under, feeling the blade clip the crest of his helm, scoring the ceramite. He answered with a brutal shoulder barge that smashed into the Drukhari's chest plate, forcing him to stumble back a pace. They met again, weapons hammering into each other in rapid succession. Strike, block, counter, disengage. Each movement was a calculated murder. The black blade scythed through the air with predator's precision. The relic axe came down in hammering, weighty blows meant to break armor and bone alike. Void Reaver darted to the left, then feinted, forcing Beornwolf's guard high. The Cabalite's offhand snapped up, splinter pistol barking. Shards ricocheted off the Astartes' gorget and pauldron. Beornwolf gritted his teeth, lunged, and his axe hooked beneath Void Reaver's sword arm. For a heartbeat he thought he had him, until the Drukhari twisted unnaturally, joints bending beyond human tolerance, slipping free like smoke. A ringing strike slammed into Beornwolf's vambrace, cutting deep through the outer plating. Pain flared as warning runes blinked in his visor. He retaliated by snapping the haft of the axe around, smashing the butt end into Void Reaver's helm, denting the elegant mask and drawing a hiss of breath from the prince. They broke apart for a second. Just a second. Both men came in again, full force, axes and swords, steel and void light, their movements a violent blur against the cold, curved walls of the torpedo bay. Neither was holding back. Neither intended to walk away without the other dead. The deck plates trembled under their boots as they clashed once more. Beornwolf felt himself slowing. His limbs were still fast, post-human reflexes undiminished, but the servos of his cataphractii plate strained with every motion. Cuts and rents gaped in the armor, hydraulics leaking. He fought as a Wigathane was taught to fight. Every blow meant to break, crush, obliterate. Void Reaver fought like a Drukhari prince, fleet, graceful, never committing to a killing stroke. His blade sought joints and weak points, bleeding the strength from Beornwolf's armor, sapping pressure, draining momentum. He was not trying to kill outright, he was dismantling him. Beornwolf roared, "Fag word!" and struck again. The axe missed, biting deep into the deck. Void Reaver's black sword sheared the relic's head in two with a flicker of shadowed steel. Beornwolf brought up the Sildathnidal, but a whip-fast cut took his augmetic hand clean off, the pistol skittering away. He drew his Sikhs, small and crude in comparison. He was still fighting like a Wigathane, and in that style he could not win. Then, familiarity, déjà vu. The feeling slid icy down his spine, the prophecy, the visions, a cavern beneath low halls, frozen lake, shapes beneath the ice, a wedding gown of blue silk soaked in blood, a warrior's hand, a ring sliding onto his finger. And now the fourth and Astartes standing over the corpse of a Drukhari lord, a black blade shimmering like living ink. It was all here, playing out as foretold. One path alters, the others fade, and beyond them, the Geofon sea, an ironclad ablaze, the fall of Nitwirtha. He could avert it by dying here, perhaps, or not. Another cut rang off his pauldron, opening a rent in the plate. Then he saw it, on Void Reaver's belt, his own master-crafted plasma pistol. Wilmund's weapon, taken from Wilmund's corpse. And if Wilmund was dead, Ælfric too. No. He was chapter master of the Void Revenants. He would not fall here. He was fighting like a Wigathane, when he should be fighting like a Revenant. Beornwolf lunged, Sikhs raised. Void Reaver anticipated, sidestepping and angling for a killing thrust. Beornwolf adjusted mid-step, the movement snapping a leg joint in his armor, then crashed bodily into the deck, bracing on the ruin of his augmetic hand. Void Reaver's sword plunged down. Beornwolf rolled, the blade spearing into his breastplate's edge, cutting ribs and spilling sealant foam. The Drukhari followed the strike down, and Beornwolf's Sikhs cracked across his helm, splitting the mask. In the same motion, his free hand tore the plasma pistol from Void Reaver's belt. One blinding shot. Void Reaver's body jerked, then slid sideways, lifeless. Panting, Beornwolf shoved himself upright using the black blade itself as a lever. Ink-like shadow hissed and sizzled where it touched his gauntlet, blistering ceramite. He wrenched himself free, sealing his side with another spray of foam, then holstered the pistol. He stood over the corpse of the Drukhari prince, the prophecy's fourth vision fulfilled. The vision still clung to him. Black blade, steel like flowing ink, jutting from the deck as if buried deep into the heart of the battleship Obscurum Fati. Beornwolf's hand went to the hilt, but Athelnoth's boots scraped over the decking as he approached, kicking the burned corpse of Void Reaver aside. The Hearthguard glanced at the ruined skull. Got your plasma pistol back then, he remarked dryly. A metallic groan echoed from the hatchway. Both men turned, pistols ready, as the hatch slammed open with a hollow clang. Water spilled across the deck, vanishing into grating below as a long dormant pump system somewhere deep in the hulk rumbled to life. Beornwolf realized some of the vessel's systems were still active. From the hatch, a dripping runesmith Torhern emerged, covered in seaweed-like strands and faintly glowing fungal spores. He saluted as though nothing were amiss. Cinnabil followed him, his shield bent nearly in half, hammer power cell flickering. Followed your transponder, Cinnabil explained with a weary nod. Through the bulkhead behind them came Sirherd with Katerina and a battered Bergwijn, whose shield looked more like a colander than a wall of steel. Sirherd took in the scene, the four of them standing over the body of the Drukhari lord, and gave a slight nod. "So you didn't need a bullet stop after all," he said. "Still lost your hand again," Bergwijn noted, brushing past to grab the black blade's hilt. He heaved, but the weapon wouldn't move. Sirherd gave his own report. "Ælfric and Wilmund are dead. Well," he paused, glancing at Bergwijn. "Wilmund's mostly dead. Meaning, he kind of came back." Bergwijn gave up wrestling the weapon. Sirherd stepped forward, using his power fist to try and wrench it free, but the blade was set fast into the ship's plating. "The city is ours," Sirherd continued. "Or rather, Commissar Angeran's. Odd fellow, mad as a box of fish. You'd like him." Beornwolf nodded, storing the name for later. Katerina spoke up. "We've decided unilaterally to capture the remains of this ship." "Why?" Athelnoth asked. She gestured to the viewport. "Shipmaster Wald here says Eotensip is crippled. And even if we found replacement coils," Torhern added, "the Eotensip lost her warp manifold deck in the battle." Cinnabil grunted, bracing with all 6 mechadendrites to pull at the sword again. Metal shrieked as one snapped off. "Enough with the damned sword," Beornwolf snapped, stepping forward. He grasped the hilt, and it slid free without resistance, as if the ship itself had chosen to let it go. The fourth prophecy, complete. The blade's surface shimmered, oily black flowing like water across its length. "Never-born blade," Katerina said in disgust. "I think not," Torhern murmured, studying the runed steel. As they watched, letters began to coil and form along the weapon's shaft. "Umbra Mortis," he read in High Gothic. Sirherd looked to Beornwolf. "Deathscad," he said in Werthen, ink-dark steel shimmering in the lumen light as though the metal were liquid. Beornwolf turned it in his grip, watching how the shadows slid across its surface. Perhaps, instead of an axe, he should carry a sword. His eyes caught on the hilt, a Drukhari amulet, crudely bound there. Not original. He tore it free, tossing the trinket aside. Beneath, set in silver, was the numeral X and the emblem of a clenched iron hand. Torhern inhaled sharply, mechadendrites twitching. "Not a daemon blade at all," the runesmith murmured. 10th Legion issue, an Iron Hands chapter relic. "Finders keepers," Athelnoth said without hesitation. Beornwolf's thoughts drifted to the prophecy. 4 visions fulfilled, and now only 2 remained between him and the disaster foretold. Ravens vast and black, leaving shattered void ships under a ghost-pale sun. Then, a world choked in green mist, a firestorm sweeping its face. Either would be enough to end Nitwertha. Beneath his feet, the old pumps rumbled, moving ancient fluids through forgotten channels. He looked around at the vast interior of the derelict. "This isn't a lifeboat," he said at last. "This is our ship now. We'll bring her back into chapter service." Sirherd's mouth split in a grin. "The Void Revenants have a battle barge." Laughter followed, grim and tired, but laughter nonetheless. Katerina cut through it, voice edged with authority. "An artifact blade from the Great Crusade and a relic starship will be of considerable interest to the Imperial Navy, the Mechanicus, the Iron Hands, and the Inquisition." Beornwolf eyed the inquisitorial seal now stitched to her borrowed tunic. "The fleet misplaced it once already. The Mechanicus doesn't know it exists. We are an Iron Hands successor, and as for the rest, I imagine that's up to the local inquisitor, isn't it?" Katerina tilted her head, considering. "Ælfscathea has been hidden for centuries. By the time anyone finds us, we'll all be relics ourselves, dead and forgotten." Athelnoth patted her arm. "You're learning." The viewport flared with sudden light. They moved to it. In the void beyond, amid drifting wreckage, a warship slid from translation, hull black against the distant stars. "Drukari?" Cinnabil asked from the rear. Bjornwolf chuckled. "I've a feeling it's our new friend." Katarina smirked. "In Werthen, a friend is an enemy you haven't killed yet?" "Something like that," Bjornwolf admitted. Bridge of the Eotinsipos officer Lurwin turned from his station. "Lord Shipmaster, battleship contact, manifold dawn identification codes. From the Vox pit, a rating called out." "Incoming hail." Shipmaster Waldheer steepled his fingers in the command throne. On Voxcaster, a crisp voice came through. "This is Admiral Dragovich, Astrum Dice. We've been searching for you." Relief flickered across Waldheer's features. A woman's voice followed, sharp and urgent. "This is Preacher Lucia Gratner. Our astropaths intercepted a warp shockwave. It's how we found you. What happened?" Waldheer nodded to himself. "Likely our librarian. We'll speak more later. We need rescue and security parties. We still have men shipside." "Deploying now," Dragovich replied. "Stand by. We'll take the Hulk under tow." Out in the debris field, the battleship Astrum Dias glided past the corpses and broken hulls. Bjornwolf had been right to recall the old Nitworthen doomsday myth, the Wyrd. There was, however, a lesser-known postscript, a final line meant to leave hope. After the white shroud covers the mounds and the halls, burying the world in eternal winter, a lone figure emerges from a hut where the fire still smolders and walks into the forest to gather wood. The drifting figure turns slowly in the void, clutching a wound at his neck, his stolen breather hissing from a dead man's lips. Below, the pale gravity well of a gas giant pulled him inexorably down. A shadow passed across him, the hazy outline of a cloaked vessel, small as a shuttle, gliding silently past. When it was gone, only wreckage remained. Cabalite machinist Valeth had vanished. In the warp, Elfric opened his eyes. The voice was gone. He was alone again. His body ached. The air was thick with the stink of sulfur and burnt metal, every breath clawing at his lungs. He rolled to one side and pushed himself up, armor cracked and blackened, limbs heavy. No weapons, no memory of the moment between the battle and now. The gravity was wrong, heavier than a ship. A planet? Teleportation? That would explain the gaps. "Hello?" His voice was swallowed by the shifting smoke. "Wilmond?" No answer. Shame bit deep. Wilmond was dead, because of him. Somewhere far off, a dull explosion thudded through the haze. He turned toward the sound and saw the silhouette of a building through the drifting ash. Limping, he made for it. The ruin resolved into a familiar shape, the Adeptus Ministorum Chapel on Itzical Binary 4, the last place he had seen Mentor Psychana Mentis. But that had been years ago. A shape darted across the street ahead. He spun toward it, trying to summon his psychic strength. Nothing. His face felt bare under his gauntlet, clean-shaven, his hair gone. He moved on. The bridge came into view. The same bridge where the chapter master's rhino had been gutted by the defender's baneblade. His boots crunched skulls and shattered weapons as he walked. It was exactly as he remembered, yet a decade should have stripped it bare. Something scuttled in the smoke behind him, another darting shadow, then a third. He stooped, grabbing a jagged shard of metal, holding it like a dagger. "Show yourself." A glint caught his eye, the hilt of a blade jutting from the ashes. He dropped the shard and pulled it free, a Seek's, its edge glowing faint blue in the haze. Behind him something stepped, the crunch of a hoof on skulls. He turned. The daemon stood in full war panoply, 12 feet tall, long horns curling from her brow, a smile carved across the scarred face where a blade had once nearly taken her head. "Cenarion," Ælfric said, coughing on the ash. She smiled wider, the old cut splitting to show her long teeth. "You fool, you had everything, and you threw it away. You could have served me." "I would never serve you." "No, you made your choice." Laughter whispered in the fog, the sniggering of things unseen. Shapes emerged from every broken window, every gutted vehicle, closing in. "For the rest of eternity," Cenarion said, voice like a caress over a blade, "you will savor the pleasure of endless pain." Ælfric bowed his head. Shame was a weight on his shoulders. But when he looked up again, the blade in his hand was steady. "Even in death, I served the Emperor." The demons advanced, and then a light blazed at the far end of the bridge. A figure emerged, impossibly tall, a long pale staff in one hand, a red augmetic eye burning like a star. The daemons shrank back, hissing, all but Cenarion, who tilted her head, watching. The figure's voice was a command that rolled through the smoke. "Your place is not here." Ælfric looked from the towering form to Cenarion. He nodded once, understanding. "My place is there." He vanished. Cenarion stood in silence. The sounds of battle faded, the bridge and ruins dissolving around her. She felt the gravel under her hooves, the familiar pull of the warp tide at her ankles. She smiled faintly, just like last time. Then she, too, was gone.